You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Head on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, you feeling better today, buddy?
Well, I am feeling better physically, but I had to go into work not feeling 100% where I didn't go yesterday. So, I guess I'm feeling a little better. I'm on the mend, and it's really nice weather today, so that kind of makes me feel a little better as well. And I'm back on the podcast with you. Yeah. So, that's always a pick-me-up.
It is. Always nice to talk football, man. Well, make sure to head over to Twitter, and you can follow me at Carl Dumler MHH, and you can follow Nick at Nick Kendell MHH, and you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating, as we value your input on our show. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Well, last episode, Nick, we kind of looked at the roster and I guess kind of broke down, is it a position that needs somebody immediately in the draft? Is it somebody that at pick 10 the Broncos could really be looking at? And so this week, or this episode, I thought it'd be a good idea, or you and I agreed that it would be a good idea here, just to look at the roster itself and just find the strengths, the weaknesses, and just kind of see overall, where is this team? What are we looking at here with the Broncos? Is this still that 6-10 roster, or is this something that could be more than that? And just see what the Broncos still have to do this offseason if they're really going to be a true playoff team. I mean, that's what we're all hoping for, right? Is see the Broncos finally end this 2-year streak of losing seasons, first time since the 1970s. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe 1970, 1971 were the last two times the Broncos had back-to-back losing seasons, which is not great.
Right. And so we got to end that streak. We got to get back into starting that next 40-year, 50-year streak that of not losing seasons in a row. And so looking at the roster here, I thought we'd start here with the strengths. And so what is one position that you sit there and say, Broncos are strong here? This is a position that I'm pretty set at, that I think going into the season, I'm feeling pretty good about it.
There is, a number of positions, and I don't think that needs versus non-needs are really binary. Some people have a hard time comprehending that. It's a scale, how much you need it. Like the Broncos, pretty good at some positions, but they need depth. Broncos have depth at some positions, but they need some difference makers at the top. So for me, the one position that I feel like they're both good at the top and have solid depth, and we talked about it yesterday, I think that really comes down to running back. And it's kind of unfortunate because that, I would argue, is the least valuable position on an entire roster, maybe outside of nose tackle. But running back, I mean, you got Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, and Devontae Booker. Now, Devontae Booker is coming up on his last season of his contract. But, man, I just look at the running back position, and for me, it's the one position that I feel the Broncos didn't do a single thing with it from now until, next offseason. I'd be okay with it. Now, they're going to bring in some depth guys. They need to bring in some UDFAs, some street free agents to compete in training camp, OTAs, preseason, because you don't want to have Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, and Devontae Booker be getting snaps in, the preseason, the Hall of Fame game even, the preseason game 4, etc. But for me, top to bottom, running back is a solid position, and not only is it a solid position talent-wise, but I'm very excited about both the youth as well as the contracts of these players. I mean, you got 3 players on rookie contracts: undrafted free agent Phillip Lindsay, 3rd-round pick Royce Freeman, 4th-round pick Devontae Booker. And so that's, to me, I mean, it's a really good spot now. It would be great to maybe get a guy who can offer a little bit more as a pass protector and a receiver. Booker's filling that role right now. Maybe you can bring on a Tavion Williams or the running back from Washington State, whose name is escaping me right now, but also a really good receiver. I think his name is Williams as well. But for me, overall, I think running back is, top to bottom, the best for the Broncos, and they're going to rely on all 3 of those guys pretty heavily next season.
Well, that's the nice thing is they all offer something different. You got Lindsay with his lightning speed, his quickness in the middle. I mean, his ability to hit the hole and just go. The big play, how many 20, 30-yard plays did he have this last year? It was pretty impressive. Royce Freeman, when he was healthy, He was a nice guy between the tackles. He showed a little bit of ability to shake and bake out there to make the first guy miss. And he had a nose for the end zone. That was really nice to see with him as well. And of course, like you said, Booker, his ability to pass block, to be a receiver. It's just nice that depending on the situation, you have a weapon to stick in there from this group and say they can get the job done. And so the Broncos can really play with that of how they want to see these guys on the field. They can give each of them different kinds of snaps. I mean, Lindsey, you want to kind of keep his snaps down because he is a little bit of a tinier guy. And he is coming off that injury and all those kind of things. But again, it's just nice where you just have that versatility. Plus, say one of these guys does get hurt, you still have two other very capable guys. You have three guys that have all pretty much started or played very significant reps. So yeah, it's definitely a position that's very, very set. Doesn't mean that you still don't add competition to the group. Like you said, you still want them for preseason too, just to not have these guys getting all those crazy reps that they don't really need at this point. But it's a very good looking group. I think one of the groups that I'm very excited about that I think is getting to be pretty set is that of cornerback. I mean, Chris Harris, obviously Pro Bowl caliber player, one of the best cornerbacks that the Broncos have ever had. Adding Kareem Jackson, Bryce Callahan to the group, Isaac Adam. I mean, we don't know what he's going to be, but he at least showed sparks of something last year, right? He at least had some moments that were not terrible, considering he was a rookie and thrown into the fire when he really wasn't expected to be. He was kind of expected to have that freshman year to kind of get acquainted to the NFL, and boom, injuries happen, and he's a starter. And he, like I said, he didn't do great, but he didn't do terrible either. And there's rumors out there that Kayvon Webster might be coming back to the Broncos on a cheap contract. And if that's true, I mean, that cornerback group, I love, just that versatility of players that they have, guys that you can move around, matchups in different ways. And then also you have some nice special teams players. Adam was a nice special teams guy last year. Webster, we know he is an all-star special teams guy, getting down the field, being the gunner. So that's a group for me that I'm feeling a lot more confident this time of year compared to I was last year. Yeah,
I can't disagree with you there. I do think that I am interested to see what Yadam is going to bring to the table now that he's kind of been pushed down the depth chart a bit. But listening to the Broncos at the owners meeting with Kareem Jackson, I think you brought in Kareem Jackson to be that boundary corner opposite Chris Harris Jr., but I'm not sure that's where he ends up playing. I think that, listening to also, I think Bill O'Brien was talking about his versatility. Kareem Jackson didn't just play boundary corner last year. He played safety. He played nickel. He played dime. And that versatility around the defense, the ability to match up is something that I think the Broncos are going to play with. I mean, a guy that I have just been fascinated with his usage and his evolution as a player over his career has been Malcolm Jenkins, who I would argue is one of the biggest key pieces of that Eagles Super Bowl run. His ability to come down and match up with tight ends and go out and play the nickel and just be a versatile chess piece on that defensive backfield is gigantic. And I think he's an underrated guy here. You have him listed at cornerback, though, and I don't think that is set in stone. He will play some snaps at cornerback, but I think they're going to be more about getting the best five guys out there and mixing and matching it up. And I can see a situation where Kareem Jackson isn't, just cornerback, but he's a safety, and you're seeing more of, a three defensive back or three cornerbacks of Chris Harris Jr., Bryce Callahan, and Isaac Yadam, with Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons as the two safeties. So it's going to be interesting to see how it comes down, where Kareem Jackson is best fit. But also, I think you're having an interesting battle for snaps between Yadam and Parks, or potentially another dark horse safety like Trey Marshall, Jamal Carter, DeMonte Thomas, or a draft pick as well. But I do agree with you. Cornerback is a position that, coming in, when you sign two guys the way the Broncos did, already having Chris Harris Jr. there and a third-round pick last year and Isaac Yadam, it looks like a much better position than it did come in. I don't know if you saw my article yet. I did have an article out there today about the Broncos secondary, and it's still a position that they're making a lot of moves, a lot of interest in it in the draft. Bringing in visits, using a lot of time looking specifically at safety, but cornerback is still on the table as well. So if the right guy falls, we talked about it yesterday, that's something that they could look at. But overall, I agree with you. I do wish we had a little bit more of a true boundary corner going up against Mike Williams, that 6'4" behemoth out there with the Chargers. Makes me a little uneasy. But still, I mean, you got talent, you got versatility, so I can't disagree with you as it being a strength top to bottom. All right, well, we still have a little bit to get to, but we will be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
And Carl and Nick are back on the Building the Broncos podcast to talk a little bit more Denver Broncos football.
I was just saying, what's another position for you then?
Well, for me, this is a strength of the roster, but it's not it's kind of, once we already talks about some depth ones, but for me, this one isn't one that has hardly any depth right now, but the top of it is so talented that it at least deserves to be discussed, and that is edge rusher position. You have Von Miller, who's arguably a top 3 defensive player in all of football, top 2 edge rusher, right up there with Khalil Mack, top 3 with Aaron Donald, Khalil Mack, and Von Miller being the 3 best players in football right now, in my opinion. J.J. Watt's up there as well, but injuries kind of put him one tier underneath those guys for me. And then opposite of him, you got Bradley Chubb, who, I mean, gosh, torrent pace last year, kind of fell off there at the end, but really, I mean, he did about as much as you could hope last season. And considering how often the Broncos were playing from behind and the limited pass rush reps that he had, got to be happy about him. So Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, very excited about those two. I think it's a very strong spot on the roster. The depth is pretty much non-existent right now, though. You got Jeff Holland, who, some people are excited about, did have a good season at Auburn, although I do think he's a little bit one-dimensional currently. He's more of that speed rusher, but he doesn't really have true bend or true burst. Got some long arms, plays with good hand usage. But, I mean, is he a great third rusher? You can't say yes yet. I mean, it's not out there yet. So going from, him being the 5th edge rusher behind Shaq Barrett and Shane Ray to now being the 3rd guy, I don't feel great about the depth there. They are bringing in Hollins from Oregon, he was absolutely just dominant in the Shrine game and has some great tools. So I'm very interested about him. Broncos are looking at the edge depth there, but I think when you got Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, arguably a top 3 edge rushing duo in football, maybe you could throw out Clowney and Watt, and then Ingram and Bosa as well. I can't think of any other edge rush duos that stick out to me as much. The Chiefs got rid of both of their edge rushers, so they're not even in the conversation anymore. But Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, they're so dominant at the top that I still say it's a position of strength for this team. I mean, we've already talked about, I think, the Broncos. This is another good topic for a podcast later on, but blue chip players on the Broncos roster. We've talked about all 3 of them, in my opinion. All 3 are on the defensive side of the ball. Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, and Chris Harris Jr. Those are the 3 that I think any team would take them. They're starters no matter what. They're all-pro candidates year in, year out. Those are the 3 great players. So having 2 of them at the same position, even if the depth isn't there yet, it's got to be a position of strength on the roster. Do need to get some more. Can never have enough pass rushers, but still worth mentioning.
That's for sure. I mean, it's hard to argue when 2 of your best players are at the same position that they shouldn't be on the topic of strength. And it really wouldn't shock me if the Broncos even 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, that's where they start targeting an edge rusher, because that depth, I mean, you and I have talked about it in the past. 2015, when we won the Super Bowl, that was a big part of it. When Von Miller or DeMarcus Ware had to go out and teams still had good pass rushers coming after the quarterback and Shaq Barrett and Shane Ray, I mean, they weren't as good, obviously. They were that next step below. But there's teams that would have taken those guys as their starters. I mean, there's a lot of teams that are looking for pass rushers. Raiders, Chiefs. They would take those kind of guys as their starters right now because they just have nothing. And for the Broncos to have 4 guys that could do that kind of production, game in, game out, it made them deadly. It made it where teams really couldn't all of a sudden kick it into high gear. I mean, Tom Brady was always famous for that of, hey, star player on defense just went out to get a breath. Oh, we're going to go speed it up. We're going to make sure they can't get back on the field and just take big time advantage of that. Couldn't do that against the Broncos. And so, for the Broncos, they got to refill this position. This is kind of the defensive tackle position. They're going to start filling that back up. The edge rusher, they're going to start filling that back up. It's just that's kind of the cycle of the NFL. You can't keep everybody. You're happy when you have them, but when we had that great defense there, 2014, 15, 16, it's one of those, you got to appreciate it. You got to appreciate what you have, because you got to know, especially defense, you can't keep those 11 to 15 pieces together. one, people are going to get older. Two, people are going to start demanding contracts. And it's just kind of the way it goes. So I like the way that the Broncos have done at being able to always fill this position and find those guys like a Shaq Barrett and add them to the roster. I like Holland. I think he needs competition, though. That was kind of one of his big questions when he was coming out, was he just didn't always have that top motor. He didn't always have that ability to motivate himself. And that's kind of why he dropped in the draft, because there's a lot of people that said he was a third-round talent, but he went undrafted. So it'll be interesting to see how the Broncos use him. And again, part of it is the coaching, too. I love what the coaches that we brought in that are known for helping edge rushers do great. Chad, he just put out something about when the 49ers had Aldon Smith. I mean, there was arguments there for a while that Aldon Smith and Von Miller were right there together and their ability. And I mean, he had 33 and a half sacks in 2 years, something like that. I mean, it was astronomical there under Vic Fangio. So I love what they can do with these guys. We'll just have to kind of see what the Broncos decide to add to it. But another group for me that I really like what the Broncos have. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't add somebody. I saw today that they had N'Keal Harry, and they're going to interview him. But the wide receiver position, I kind of like what the Broncos have done. I like Courtland Sutton. I've really come around on this guy. I think he could really develop into a huge star. And now understand, some of this, when I'm talking about this being a strength of the team, is one, expecting huge development from Hamilton and Sutton in year 2. And it's also with the idea that Sanders comes back healthy. And so, I mean, there's a lot of questions with this choice, but I wanted to put it here just because I do think it can be a strength of this team. Again, you got Sutton on one side, who is showing great strength, ability to win those 50-50 balls. If he can clean up some of his drops, that I think that was more just concentration, understanding the offense, those kind of things. I think he'll be better in what they're going to do with him this year. Sanders, obviously, if he is healthy, is a great receiver, great option, always getting himself open. Deshaun Hamilton, we talked about it on the show so many times, that this guy was open so many stinking times. Irritated me so much how open this guy was. He should have had so many great games last year, and just no quarterback that could get him the football. I really trust Joe Flacco to look to his way a lot this year. And then Tim Patrick, I think he's an underrated receiver. He's not top talent, but for being the number 4 guy on the team, I think he's a pretty good fourth option in the NFL.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. The Broncos have been, making some visits with wide receivers. They are bringing in N'Keal Harry from Arizona State, which I think is a little bit interesting. However, watching Harry, he's not just a prototypical X. He's also kind of a big slot and a guy who offers some yak ability. So he's an interesting player for sure. And, they did say that they were looking to bring some juice to the offense, been shopping Emmanuel Sanders, et cetera, et cetera. So I think wide receiver is a position that, while it is solid, there's a lot of relative unknowns. I mean, Courtland Sutton, he needs to take another step. Deshaun Hamilton, getting open, but still, the production's not there yet. Tim Patrick, more potential than anything, and Sanders is coming off that ACL. So I do agree with you. We're talking about a 6-10 team right now, so not everything is going to be a true strength across the board in the NFL. But in speaking of the Broncos roster, I do think wide receiver is a strength and an area they do seem to be thinking about targeting to get a little bit stronger. So I think they will bring in a wide receiver somewhere in the draft as well. Hopefully somebody that'll complement, but we'll see what happens. N'Keal Harry is an interesting one. I got to ask, what do you think about that?
You know that I love that kid. Yeah. I've been saying that he is probably my number 2 wide receiver in this draft. And I love that he is a very well-rounded wide receiver. There's plays where he could take that screen pass and take it for 50 yards. He could go down the field and make that 50-50 catch. He doesn't have the long speed that you hope for, but he's strong. He's got good hands. He's decent route runner. I mean, that's an area he's definitely got to improve on, but it was one of those where Arizona State pretty much ran their offense through him. They wanted to get that guy the ball, whatever way possible. I mean, if he was double covered, the quarterback would still throw it his way. And so that just kind of shows the trust that quarterbacks can develop with him. And that was the same thing with Sutton. There's a lot of times where even when he's covered, he's open. And so you add a second guy like that, especially with Joe Flacco, who does like to play a lot of that 50-50 ball. There are a lot of deeper throws where he's kind of either going for the 50-50 ball or the pass interference. And so getting two guys that you can put on the outside or move them inside, either way. I mean, I've heard they've talked about Hamilton even moving outside. It gives you options also with Sanders of what you're going to do with him. I mean, there's just a lot of things that you could do with a player like Harry that really adds to the roster, can open up a lot of cap space again with Sanders possibly being gone. So I do like it. I really do. I mean, obviously not at pick 10. I mean, if I don't want DK Metcalf at pick 10, I don't want Harry at pick 10. But pick 41, oh, yeah, I would be pretty ecstatic about that pick. And it would be very understandable of adding another weapon to this offense. And a guy that he has things that are like Sutton, but he's not exactly like Sutton. So you can still do different things and have teams have to prepare for a lot of different things that you're going to throw offensively. And he can start off day one. You can run some screen passes to him. You can run that 9 route and let him go win the 50-50 ball. There's a lot of things that you can do as a rookie with him that a lot of other rookies I wouldn't feel as comfortable with.
All right, now one more question for you, draft related, because this is very much a draft podcast. Let's say DK Metcalf, is he your wide receiver 1?
He would be.
Okay, I'm just assuming there, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
So Deebo Samuel, Hakeem Butler, and N'Keal Harry are all on the board. I feel like that's kind of the consensus. Wide receivers 2, 3, and 4. If I think Hollywood Brown with that injury, the Liz Frank is pretty serious. Which of those guys are you taking in a vacuum for the Broncos?
Oh man, it would be a competition between Deebo and N'Keal. I would probably go with Harry though.
Okay, interesting.
I just, since he is my number 2 receiver, it's hard for me to, if I'm looking at my big board, Harry's higher than Deebo right now. So it would be very difficult for me to go in a different direction, I guess. I mean, I like Deebo a little bit more because he offers a little bit different versatility, but it's still, I'd still go with Harry though.
All right. Well, interesting. Sorry to put you on the spot. That's not in our notes there, listeners, but kind of like to make Carl a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. So that always makes a good podcast, right?
I appreciate that.
Off the cuff.
You keep me on my toes here.
You got to. Otherwise, actually, I want to keep your heels on the ground, Carl. It's Kansas. You're going to blow away if you have on your toes too much. So, all right. Well, for me, the last position here that I have as a strength, again, kind of starting to stretch here a little bit, but I got to say offensive tackle. Garrett Bowles, this is definitely a make or break year for him with Munchak coming in. There's started to be more and more, the whispers are starting to grow into a growl, so to speak, that Bowles' concentration and work ethic, is not totally up to par so far. And with Munchak coming in, this is his chance. Year 3, going to be 27, 28 years old this year, I believe. It's make or break time. They're going to give him another shot, obviously, at left tackle. He did show improvement down the stretch last year, but I think that mentality is going to be huge. And if he's not up to snuff with the work ethic and the mentality, if Mike Munchak gives the thumbs down, then, goodbye. Like, you're bringing in Mike Munchak for a reason. So, but still, I think the offensive tackle, specifically left tackle and right tackle, this is the most set it's been since over a decade. When the Broncos had Ryan Harris and Ryan Clady at the offensive tackle positions. Now, Orlando Franklin and Ryan Clady was solid as well. I think Clady had an injury, and Franklin was kind of a little bit of a up and down right tackle / guard, a little bit of a plotter there. I thought he looked better at guard. But offensive tackle, the depth is non-existent. I mean, you have Elijah Wilkinson, who's kind of plays that position. You got Schlotman and Andreas Knapp, who's a Viking from Denmark, who's, there's some developmental upside there, but the depth is non-existent. Let's just assume that depth is non-existent overall. But starting tackle, left tackle, starting right tackle, feel about as good about it as I have in a long time. And it feels good just to say offensive tackle is a position of strength on the roster. Now, if one of them goes down, you're in trouble. But overall right now, I got to like the left tackle and right tackle situation. The interior offensive line, that leaves a lot to be desired. But overall, I do agree with this list. Is anybody else? Maybe kicker?
It's set. I did see that he tweeted out the other day that if Sanders or Lindsey get a penalty after a touchdown, because they changed the rule now where you can force the kicker to kick a 48 yard extra point. He said that they'd be fighting on the sidelines if he got a penalty or if they got a penalty. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects kickers this year and how that changes maybe how teams do the celebration part of things. But he's definitely a strength. I mean, he's a guy that's definitely going to make the roster. He had a little bit of struggles last year, but seemed to kind of clean some of that up. But definitely set in place. I'm trying to think of any other positions that are definitely set for the Broncos. Is there? Nope.
I guess I would say the defensive line itself is a strength. I mean, if you got Derek Wolfe, Adam Gotsis, and Shelby Harris, I mean, we still are talking about those guys. They're all free agents next year, and we don't have a true nose tackle yet. Shelby Harris has been rumored to be a guy who might take some more snaps there as that shaded one technique. But I would argue defensive line is also a potential strength when you look at those three. I mean, they're all at least average players. Now the depth is concerning. And Zach Kerr obviously offering some depth there, but they could use some more an injection of talent there. But I would say it's a level of strength, at least up there, up to par with offensive tackle. That's
true. That is true. I mean, they are established starters and guys that have made impacts in games. I had to laugh that Antonio Brown made some kind of joke about how his quarterback threw to a defensive tackle. And I kept thinking, oh, yeah, that's our boy. But no, I mean, it is. It's definitely a strength, but definitely a position. I mean, and most of these, like we already talked about, the depth at edge rusher, cornerback could add another player, wide receiver could add another player. So even though they have established players, they definitely could use other players added to it. I mean, that's just kind of the name of the game in the NFL. You're always looking to upgrade. You're always looking to get those cheaper options, obviously through the draft, and add to that depth to make the 53-man roster look very good top to bottom. You want where at the end of the year or end of training camp that teams are wanting to take your players. And so some of these positions, I mean, they have good starters, but definitely nothing behind them, nothing that I would say teams are really clamoring for at this point. And I'd say defensive line falls into that category.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to talk about the roster weaknesses coming up here, unfortunately, because we're a fair and balanced podcast, I would say. But first, we're going to take a quick break.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All righty, and we're back. And now we're going to talk about some roster weaknesses on the current Broncos roster before the draft. And for me, I'm going to start off. I'm going to go a little bit out of order here just because we're going to break it down. But for me, the biggest weakness right now on the team overall from top to bottom for the roster is got to be the interior offensive line, just because it's nothing but questions for me. Ronald Leary, when healthy, has been a solid player, but he hasn't been healthy the last 2 seasons, and I'm not sure about his exact fit moving to a more zone-heavy scheme. He's been more of a power player at that left guard position. So is he going to be healthy, and is he going to fit? Yeah, I don't know. Then after that, Connor McGovern, he played solid at right guard last year, did get owned by higher level talent when he was left on an island against him, guys with length. I mean, Leonard Williams probably is on his birth certificate as his dad now after just owning him a few times. But Connor McGovern, I think he's going to be a solid player for the Broncos, center or right guard. But after that, it's just a huge amount of question marks. Elijah Wilkinson, up and down last year, but I would not say he was not an average player. He'd be a below wins above replacement player if you kind of had that stat in football. And then after that, Sam Jones, total unknown right now. Some guys speak highly of him, but he was a 6th round pick, I believe, last year. So we'll see if he even gets a chance or he has another redshirt year kind of developing into an interior offensive lineman. And Nico Fala, I believe I'm pronouncing that yet. He's probably more than likely a camp body. Maybe we'll see him develop into something. You never know. Mike Munchak is one of the best in the business, so we'll see. But interior offensive line, it's a big yikes for me right now.
Please make sure to show respect to Aquaman.
Man, I'm more of a Marvel guy.
All right. I'll give you that. No, it is. It's a very unknown group. It's definitely a group it makes a ton of sense to use a high draft pick to add talent to this group. Because, I mean, like you said, Ronald Leary, what's he going to be? He just got back from a torn Achilles. And, I mean, he's had other injuries. He came in as kind of a known injury concern. He dropped in the draft because he was an injury concern. There's just a lot of things there that you just say, what is he? What's he going to be for the Broncos this year? And can he hold up the entire year? And like you said, I mean, McGovern's going to be a starter somewhere, but even there, he's a good, not great player.
I would say he's average. I wouldn't even say good. I'd say he's
that's
starting average for the league. Maybe I would say starting average for right guard, slightly below average at center. But granted, that's because some of the line protection calling out and the snap exchange wasn't clean. So maybe a full off season there, he's a little better. But I would say average player. And I'm talking about a true bell curve, not this, everybody gets a B and the worst grade is a C kind of thing,
right.
True bell curve. So he's a average to maybe slightly below average starter in the grand scheme of things for the entire NFL.
Right. But, I mean, you can expect to plug him in somewhere in that starting group, most likely, for the Broncos. You just can't completely replace the entire interior in one off season, and especially when he spent so much at right tackle. And like I said, Elijah Wilkinson, he started out a couple games there where he was playing guard and looked pretty good, but teams seemed to figure him out. And that's what you're always looking for is there's a lot of players that can come in and have 1 to 2 great games. What happens when teams get some film on them? What do they look like then? And it seems like teams knew to run stunts at him. And just that communication on the interior was just terrible once the injuries happened. And it makes sense that would happen. But again, he just really didn't seem to click when it came to understanding what teams were trying to run at him. And so again, very much a replaceable player. For me, a position that I really look at, tight end. I mean, can we really trust any of these guys? All 3 of the Broncos tight ends that we're looking at for this year, Hireman, Butt, and Fumagalli, 2 of them are coming off pretty much season-ending injuries. Hireman, again, well, he had a season-ending injury, but at least he played at least part of the season. So right now, this is a position that definitely has a lot of question marks. I do trust Hireman a little bit more because he showed something last season. He showed that he seemed to care a little bit more, seemed to really have some things start to click. But still, I mean, this is a position that you're looking at and saying very much could add a big upgrade into this position.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I am excited about having Scangarello coming over because, as we've seen, this Kyle Shanahan offense has been really good at scheming tight ends open. And I think that, you have talents there, but I think being able to scheme the tight end open is a big deal as well. So that I'm excited about Hireman's upside there. But again, this is a walking mash unit at tight end. So while I don't love the value of tight end at pick 10, going back to Thomas Hall's piece that you just don't find the value. And I mean, I think O.J. Howard was a better overall prospect than either Iowa guy, which again, I think I die a little bit inside every time I say that. But and it's a deep tight end class too. And you see the Broncos, I mean, apparently they spent a lot of time with Warring at the San Diego State Pro Day, and they're bringing in Josh Oliver for a visit. And I've heard they've shown an interest in Moreau as well from LSU. So it seems like they're looking at that late day 2 to mid day 3 kind of tight end, which makes sense in this class, in my opinion. And that's where you're going to find the best value for the position. But it is definitely a position that needs another player in there because, again, walking mash unit. All right, for me, for the next position that I would say is a weakness right now, and it's a different kind of weakness. I talked about the Broncos edge rushers being a strength because you had the top of the guys were great, but the depth wasn't great. Well, this is kind of a deep position, but it's a bunch of, in my opinion, average to below average players, and specifically in the context to what Fangio wants as far as speed, sideline to sideline ability, athleticism, and coverage upside. And that is the off-ball linebacker, obviously. You got 2 definitely more of a thumper in the box kind of linebackers and Todd Davis and Josie Jewell. And while, you can kind of hide them a little bit, Fangio puts a lot more on the plate, a lot more coverage ability on those linebackers. Playing zone compared to playing man-to-man is something that I think is going to be a little bit easier for those guys. I mean, Josie Jewell showed he had some zone ability at the University of Iowa, but I still think it's overall a weakness on this roster because there's not much athletic upside with those 2 guys. Todd Davis is more of a between-the-tackles thumper and come up and fill a gap, get off blocks. Josie Jewell is more of a run funneler. It's stealing that from Ben Albright. He's brought that up. I'm like, oh, man, I love that description. Because he has his instincts, but he's smaller and he's not athletic. He's quick, but he struggles getting off blocks sometimes, and he doesn't have sideline to sideline ability. And he can sit in that zone, but that lack of length and overall athleticism limits him. So off-ball linebacker at the top, not great. Then after that, you're definitely reaching on some guys. Keyshawn Bierria, a 6th-round pick last year. He's going to be fighting for a roster spot this year. I don't know if he's a great fit for what Fangio wants. So if they bring in a linebacker, maybe trade for Darren Leanne, bring in a day 3 linebacker, then man, he's probably gone. Alexander Johnson, again, kind of a guy who's another thumper, not great athleticism. Maybe he'll make the roster. And then Joe Jones, who has great athleticism, but I haven't seen that ability as a processor yet. And I think people are really hoping on him. He does have good speed. He can move around a little bit, but it takes more than that to play linebacker, obviously. So overall, I'd say linebacker is probably a weakness on this roster. If we were playing that Wade Phillips defense where you're really reliant on the defensive line and the cornerbacks, then probably not as much of a weakness. But considering how much Fangio has historically put on his linebackers, I'd say that they lack the talent at the top that the Broncos will want on the roster. So I'm going to list it as a weakness for now.
Can we talk real quick about Fangio's quote here recently that has had Twitter lighten up about the linebackers of this draft?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think there's a misconception and understanding this of him saying that Roquan Smith was a better prospect right now or coming out in his draft compared to White and Bush. And so a lot of people have said, well, maybe that means that they're not going linebacker here at pick 10.
Continue. Sorry, I had to.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one of those. Both things can be true, or they're still going linebacker, yet they're still not at this moment as good as Roquan Smith. I mean, that's something you have to keep in mind is Roquan Smith, he was a very highly sought after player coming out of the draft. There were some that were talking. I mean, we even had Eric Trickle who was saying he'd be okay with taking him at 5 last year. And so that should just show, one, he was a very finished product coming out of college. He was a guy that showed a lot of great plays on tape. And when you have White and Bush, who are a little bit more, not quite the instinctive level, I would say, there's that athleticism, of course, but there's a lot of times where you see them taking some false steps. You see them a little bit out of position, sometimes falling for the fakes, all those kind of things where they're just not quite that finished product. That doesn't mean that they're not going to be as good or better than Roquan Smith eventually. And I do love the pairing of them, especially with Fangio and Donatel. But it does make sense to say that because I think it is true. I think I would have Roquan Smith higher up on my rankings if they were all in the same draft. Smith would be higher for me.
Smith was a better player coming out. He had better keys, better diagnosis ability, and overall just better instincts, smoother in coverage, et cetera, et cetera. And who knows how high he was on the board for the Bears last year. The Bears, it was a quarterback-heavy top 10 last year, and the Bears were picking 8, and the Bears didn't need quarterback. They just took Mitch Trubisky the year before. So, I mean, honestly, looking at it, potentially Roquan Smith was a top 3 player on the Bears board last year. That doesn't mean that Devin White or Devin Bush are not on the board for the Broncos. They could be top 7 players. Doesn't mean they'd be as highly graded as the Roquan Smith was last year. I would argue that for me, I'd go back and forth. Roquan Smith is a safer player as far as the upside, but I am a little bit drawn to the upside of Devin White. I understand that the keying is not all there yet. The tackling can be a little bit out of control, but I think that the blitzing ability with the bigger frame, with the higher athleticism, with just the energy he plays with, makes me fall a little bit more in love with Devin White. Personally, that's just me speaking. I love him as a player. A lot of fun. He radiates energy out there, and there's something to be said about that for the linebacker position. But I don't think what he said takes linebacker off the board for the Broncos at 10. I would argue that anything saying that is misleading. Now, maybe Fangio is trying to mislead. It's smoke screen season. He literally said some of it's going to be smoke screen, some of it not. I'm going to keep you guys guessing. That's the whole point. So linebacker is not off the board at 10. Anybody who thinks that, shame on you. That's one of the positions the Broncos are definitely looking at. I think it's a high probability they go linebacker at 10. But I think that what he said can be true while the Broncos are still interested at off-ball linebacker at 10 and ran.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. I just wanted to get that out there just because it seems like people have been arguing, is this him saying that they're not going linebacker at 10? No, that's not even remotely close to what he said. I don't think it was even a smokescreen, anything that he said. I think everything that he said very much could be true. and they still take one of the linebackers and are very happy about it. But let's look at our last position we wanted to talk about here with a weakness, and that is the quarterback position. And I think we both agree Joe Flacco is an upgrade over what we had last year, right?
Oh, yeah. I know that some people will not agree, but I think Joe Flacco is a low-level starter tier where, to me, Case Keenum was a high-level backup tier. So we're making some very small progress. I think there's a meme out there. It's like, I know it doesn't feel like we're improving, but little by little, it counts. So I'll take a little bit of a step forward with Flacco and just a little bit more confidence. And a guy who, you could tell in the press conference, he's been there. And I think there's something to be said for having that presence, especially in Denver.
Well, and I think something else with this, and I think we talked to Eric Trickle about this, is for the Broncos, trading a 4th-round pick to get Joe Flacco, where now they aren't really forced to have to trade up to get a quarterback in this draft, that they can sit at 10 and wait for their guy. That's going to cost a lot less in the long run compared to having to trade next year's 1st-round pick, maybe even more to get up and get their guy, where they can sit at 10, and if quarterback falls to them, that's great. If not, well, they can take another player. Can we keep saying this on here, Ed Oliver, till we speak it into an existence?
I don't know, man. Eric Trickle and our new boy Trevor Judge might be a little bit upset.
We got to keep driving that nail in there for him. Just that little bit of irritation. But no, it's just Joe Flacco, at least he opens up things for the Broncos, where I felt like if they stayed with Case Keenum, quarterback was very much a pretty big force of where they needed to go. It wasn't completely on the books, this is where they're going to have to go, but it was a lot more compared to Flacco. You can feel a little bit more comfortable with him there. Maybe you can put off quarterback for another year if you need to do that. Or, like I said, you can maybe have a guy fall to you and you're in love with him and you say, hey, we can give you a year to develop under this guy, and boom, we got lots of cap space next year. But beyond him, you have Garrett Grayson, the Colorado State kid. And, he's been, there's nothing really special there. Kevin Hogan, again, backup caliber. You're looking to upgrade on all 3 guys, that's for sure.
Both of them are camp arms to me. Maybe quarterback 3s. They'll kick around the league for a while, but if they're starting any large chunk of games, you're probably going to be talking about in contention for the 1st overall pick next year. That's the level of quarterback there. So, do you remember I remember I had that article before the free agency started about how the Broncos obviously still, quarterbacks on the table with Joe Flacco still. And remember the Kevin Hogan truther in the comments?
That he could develop into a starter?
Oh, dude, he was saying Kevin Hogan would have been the best quarterback in this draft, and giving his winning percentage and stats at Stanford and everything like that.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. There's even Garrett Grayson people out there, because he's a Colorado State guy.
State stuff. Yeah,
right. Yeah. And so I remember there was some people saying the Broncos should trade a 1st-round pick to the Rams to get him. And, there's some media people that were saying that, like, oh, go get this guy. He is so good.
Well, that's not throw anybody too far under the bus, but the trade for Sean Mannion people, I know it was one of the radio stations was talking about that.
Yep.
Yikes. Did you ever watch Arrested Development?
Yes.
It makes me think, there's Garrett Grayson truthers and Kevin Hogan truthers out there, and it's the bit with Tobias, and when he's afraid to be, he's never naked, as they call it, or never nude, excuse me, and he's eating his corn dog at the production, and he's like, that's a very common condition, there are dozens of us, and holds up the corn dog. Like that is Garrett Grayson and Kevin Hogan truthers. Like those guys, if they're out there playing, you are in a buttload of trouble. And maybe that's what you need to jumpstart the franchise, because you'd be in legitimate talk for the 1st overall pick next year. It'd be like the year when Peyton Manning got hurt for the Colts. Like, obviously Peyton Manning is way better than Joe Flacco, but that's the yikes level quarterback play that you'd be getting. So quarterback, I know that Joe Flacco's an improvement here, but it's still a roster weakness, just because Joe Flacco's, to me, not the long-term option. I don't think he'll be here more than 2 years. And then behind that, a whole bunch of nope.
Hard to disagree, man.
And I do want to say one more position here that we don't have listed. But what's the point of doing an outline, Nick, if you're going to keep throwing things out there? But listening into comments from Vic Fangio at the owners' meetings, he said that the Broncos were excited about having Justin Simmons, and he talked about Kareem Jackson being versatile and playing some safety as well. No talk of any other safeties. And the Broncos courted a fair amount of safeties in free agency, and it just comes off to me that the Broncos are not fully satisfied with the other safety options on the team outside of Simmons. Now, I know that there's some media people out there that are very big on Will Parks. I think he had a solid year last year. Granted, I don't think he's the best in this cover 2 role. I like him more as that nickel backer type where he's kind of that heavy slot, so to speak, dime backer, if you would, as well. But I think that safety is a position, it's kind of like linebacker where there is a lot of names and we've seen those names out there. But as far as quality guys that are going to do what the Broncos are asking them to do in that cover 2 kind of role where, they have to be able to play that back end, I don't think it's a great spot on this roster right now. Nobody I can hang my hat on, at least.
Well, we talked about it on the last episode about that very thing of it would not shock us one bit to see the Broncos go safety in the second round. There's going to be some decent names that could be right there. That's right into first, beginning of second is kind of where you're starting to see maybe a couple of those safeties begin to come off the board. And so if there's one there that the Broncos really like, it really would not shock me to see them go get them. Because like you said, they've been courting a lot of guys in free agency. You don't do that if you feel very, very secure with what you have on your roster. And Will Parks, I love the guy. I love his fight. He had probably the best play of the year last year with his hit at the end zone where the guy fumbled through the end zone and ended up being a touchback. That was a hustle play. That was a smart play. It was everything you hope to see. But again, he's still just average player. There's a lot of reasons the Broncos were a 6-10 team. They just didn't have the talent on the roster to compete with a lot of top teams. Throw in they had tough schedule, tough division, all those kind of things. And so there's a lot of areas on this team that need a huge upgrade if they're really going to compete, if they're going to become a consistent playoff team. And like you said, safety, I think you can do a huge upgrade at that position and really take this team, this roster to a whole new level.
Yeah, I can't disagree. I think safety, we're talking 10 different positional groups here. The only one, would that be all of them? Did we talk every single one? I think we did. So 5 and 5, essentially. Covering the bases here. But for me, I think that safety, outside of Simmons, nobody listed right now I feel great about being a starter. Granted, you can't ever go into the season with a perfect roster. There's always going to be some holes, and that takes, other talent and coaching to kind of scheme that up. But right now, the depth is solid. Simmons coming off a down year last year. Hopefully he'll play better this year. But I think it's a position that is on the lower end of the roster right now. So we will see. Okay, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Nick Kendell MHH. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find more content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.